Cube not only runs the Long Island Steel train, but they also run another goods train. A train from the Amcor paper factory in Maryvale to Melbourne docks. This train is commonly referred to as the Maryvale Paper Train, and in today's video, I will be explaining that train. Maryvale Paper History. Located in the Latrobe Valley, the Maryvale Paper Mill was opened in 1938 by APM, Australian paper manufacturer. The site was chosen for its close proximity to timber, this one's obvious, electricity with the Yallourn open cut just a few kilometers away, and readily available water with the Latrobe River nearby. The site for the mill was finalized in 1937, and construction started the same year. At the beginning, the paper plant made a deal with the government to be allowed to go into the forests and collect lower quality timber and turn it into paper. This was good for both parties, as leftover wood and lower quality wood would be removed to reduce fuel for forest fires, and the paper mill capitalists could make some money. The railway siding to the paper mill was partially opened on the 12th of October 1937 to help with construction of the rest of the paper mill and siding. The line fully opened in November 1938. From the beginning, the siding was privately owned, and strangely, rather than having Victorian engines sent down the line to pick up loads of paper, the APM actually used their own shunting locomotives, carrying loads of paper from the plant to the exchange yard at Morwell. And I'll go through all their yard shunters in more detail later. The mill pioneered a new type of production method using wood pulp, called craft process, which in simple terms turned wood into pulp, and that pulp turned into paper. By 1939, the plant was already processing a whopping 28,000 tons of wood pulp per year, and full-scale production commenced in 1940 with the opening of Maryvale Mill No. 1. In 1939, the worst bushfire to occur in Victorian history nearly killed the plant's wood supply. However, the operation continued as burnt timber could still be used for pulp, surprisingly working better in the heat. Picking up low-quality wood in the Latrobe Valley was getting too inefficient. So, in 1951, the APM Forest Proprietary was formed to start a new plantation of pulpwood to use at the mill, starting out with 250 hectares of trees, with an extra 900 added every year for the next 10 years. In 1986, the APM was renamed to Amcor Limited. For the previous years, a mixture of random wagons were used to deliver paper, all hired from the VR. However, with the standardization of the Melbourne to Adelaide main line, there was a possibility for change. Private operation of the siding remained until the 1st of March 1996, when the siding was handed to the Public Transport Corporation, and a new intermodal container service run by V-Line commenced from the paper mill direct to Melbourne docks. Surprisingly, the exchange yard survives sort of today. It's not really a yard anymore, more like a single siding. It's also just a dead end, so I have no idea what its purpose is. Maybe for track maintenance vehicles, who knows. The contract ding-donged around for a few years. First to V-Line Freight, which was gobbled up by Freight Victoria, which got a birth certificate change to Freight Australia, which was then consumed by Pac National, and Pac National lost their contract to Cube in June 2013, and they are the current operators. Containerized timber is also loaded at Maryvale, although in very small quantities. Today, the paper mill is one of the largest employers in the region, with over 1,000 employees, and it produces a lot more than just plain paper today. They also recycle paper. In fact, they no longer even produce white copy paper, as Vic Forest was forced by the Supreme Court to slow down harvesting in the area. As a result, reflex copy paper was no longer produced at the plant in January 2023. Shunters. I can't actually find any information on the yard shunters before 1956. I would assume that they either hired a locomotive from the Victorian Railways or bought one of the ancient locomotives from the 1860s. The leading theory for me is that they didn't actually need a shunter until the Gippsland line was electrified in 1956, so before electrification, trains just picked up wagons direct from the mill. However, after 1956, it was more economical to just get a shunter to bring the wagons down to the exchange yard. In 1956, the APM bought locomotive D2-604. The locomotive started out life on the VR as DD557 in 1912. It was built by Bayer Peacock and Company in England as part of the 200-strong DD class. It was renumbered a few times in 1925 and was rebuilt to have superheating in 1929. Where it was reclassified as a D2 class. In 1951, it was renumbered. By the end of its working life, it was one of the last D2s in service, and was sold to APM in 1956. It was equipped with a slightly unconventional tender, with an A2 underframe and D3 tender tank. It was also converted to oil firing. I assume the same oil guts from the A2 tender was just slapped into a D3 body, and the locomotive was sent over to Maryvale. It didn't last very long at Maryvale, as the locomotive was most likely very old and worn. It was withdrawn from service in 1961, and the APM was very nice and donated it to the Newport Railway Museum, and it's the last D2 class to survive in preservation. The next shunters to come along were these things. These were known as Whitcomb locomotives, named after their manufacturer, G.O.D. Whitcomb Company. Whitcomb was a subsidiary of the Baldwin Locomotive Works, which is where most of these locomotives were built, besides the few which were built in Canada. They are specifically 50-ton Whitcomb switches, and it's not clear when they arrived. Presumably they were bought second-hand and delivered immediately after D2 604, as the Whitcomb Company ceased production in 1956. These two worked the line for nearly 20 years, from 1961 to the late 1980s, shuttling wagon loads of paper down to the exchange yard at Morwell, where electric locos would come pick them up. There is only one noticeable difference between the two locos, and that's the thickness of their chevron stripes, with number 2 looking like a barcode and number 1 looking normal. In the late 1980s, these two were getting more and more out of date. With trains getting heavier, they couldn't keep up, and they were both withdrawn and scrapped in late 1980. So what replaced them? Well, for the remaining couple of years, the Amcor just leased locomotives from V-Line, starting with T342, which was leased until around 1991, when Y173 took over. Both were painted bright yellow, and if you remember in the Long Island Steel video, their Y-Class was also painted bright yellow. When T342 was handed back to V-Line, it was kept in its yellow livery, and it was stored for a few years before the South Gippsland Tourist Railway snapped it up. And then it did some really weird stuff in the early 2000s, which I won't get into here. Y173 worked as a shunter for a couple of years, clearly being the favorite as it also received APM logos. It was then handed back to V-Line in 1993, and you can see it rusting away here at Newport Workshops. For the remaining 3 years, presumably other random locos were used, or trains just ran direct. The journey. The modern day train is operated by Cube, which, if you remember, they also operate the Long Island Steel train. Leading the train is usually 2 back-to-back G classes, VL classes, or a combination of both. You used to be able to get triple headers with some of the veteran locos or heritage fleet, but that doesn't really happen anymore, and now it's almost always double heading. Rather than having a hodgepodge of wagons like the steel train, the Maryvale Paper is purely composed of SQEF wagons, around 29 wagons and 58 containers. That's about 2,100 tons of fully loaded paper. The entire length of the train comes to around 792 meters, and around 30,000 containers are transported every single year, with 20,000 of those exported and 10,000 of those used domestically. The containerized paper is stacked up here, next to the rail line. Once an empty row of wagons has arrived, these red container grabber thingies spring into action, loading the wagons while the locomotives run around. Once the train is all loaded and the crew is ready, the train sets off, traveling slowly down the siding, notably crossing the former Princess Highway at a level crossing. It stops in the exchange yard for a while waiting for the line to be clear, and then it travels down the Gippsland main line at no more than 80 km per hour. It continues along the entire Pakenham suburban line and then operates at no more than 40 km per hour between Caulfield and South Yarra. So if you're trying to spot it there, you will surely have time. The Metropolitan network also has a height restriction on 3 meter tall containers, which are banned. However, Metro makes an exception on the Maryvale Paper for some reason. The max height of a container on the regional network is 4.1 meters. However, that is about to change with the Inland Rail project. High containers are only allowed through 3 track pairs through Flinders Street. The special lines, platforms 8 and 9, and the up and down Sandringham lines, platforms 10 and 12. Platforms 3 and 4 are also permitted, and that's a relic from the experimental 4D. So if the Maryvale Paper train ran away, we could send it down to Box Hill. Just like the Long Island Steel train, it goes along the New Viaduct and the goods lines, and into North Diamond Yard, where the containers are unloaded, and the same thing repeats all over again. Given the distance the train needs to travel and how long it is, the Maryvale Paper train is limited to operate during these following times: between Sunday 7 PM and Monday 5 AM, Monday to Thursday 9 PM and 5 AM, between Friday 9 PM and 7 AM Saturday, and between Saturday 7 PM and Sunday 7 AM. Fairfield. Maryvale isn't the only plant in Victoria which had a railway connection. The APM also had a plant at Fairfield. The Fairfield plant actually opened earlier than Maryvale, and construction commenced in 1918. The railway siding opened on the 29th of July 1919 to assist with the construction, as well as allowing some trains to run. The full paper mill was finished in 1921. The siding wasn't actually too difficult to make, half the job was already done. 2 decades prior, the outer circle line ran right next to where the mill would have been built. When the line was closed in 1893, the alignment was completely intact, and after a bit of realigning, the new siding was finished. In fact, despite East Camberwell to Fairfield being closed in 1893, most of the line was later reopened to goods traffic and sometimes passenger traffic. The siding split to serve 3 sections of the plant, one for unloading paper pulp, one for unloading coal, and the last one which ran the length of the mill and was general purpose. In 1954, the mill gained a new boiler house, and the siding was electrified in the same year. Unlike the Maryvale siding, VR trains would regularly make the journey down. In fact, 400 tons of coal per day would be delivered to the mill coming from the brown coal mine in Madingley. They were painstakingly hand unloaded until a wagon tipper was constructed in 1951. Paper pulp was also transferred by train from Maryvale to Fairfield, where it would be further processed. After the Chandler Highway was built in the 1960s and Grange Road was realigned, the siding cut right through the middle of the intersection. Seeing as the trains weren't frequent and they were often slow, they didn't bother making it grade separated, but they also didn't provide boom gates, which I find strange. Both sidings had their fair shares of rail tours over the years. The overhead wiring was removed in June 1988, as they had no more electric goods locos to run down the line, all being withdrawn a few years prior. A short section of overhead was retained for stabling one 6-car train, still pretty useless. Trains were operated by T-classes and Y-class diesel locomotives for the remaining few years. It was fully closed in 1994, with factors towards the closure including the mill switching to gas boilers, as well as something to do with pulp. The rails to the plant were removed in 2003 to 2004, and were all sent to the Yarra Valley Tourist Railway. In 2012, the plant was also closed, and currently, the former site has been redeveloped with high-rise apartments. The land where the track was has also started to be redeveloped, and in 2021, this ugly substation was put in front of where the junction was. Thank you all for watching, I hope you liked the video. If you want a place to hang out, you should join my Discord, and if you want me to support me even more, then you can join my Patreon, or just watch some more of my videos. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all later.